Have you ever felt that magnetic pull away from the one thing you know you should be doing? Yeah, we all have. So today, we're not going to talk about just gritting your teeth and using willpower. We're going to look at the actual science of your brain to understand and finally overcome that pull.
Okay, first things first, let's just tear down a huge misconception right now. If you procrastinate, you are not lazy. You are not broken. It is not a character flaw. In fact, thinking about it that way is one of the biggest reasons we never actually fix it.
See, procrastination isn't a flaw. It's a brain state. It's a totally predictable response from your brain. It's a habit, really, a coping mechanism. And you know what? Like any habit, it's a pattern that you can absolutely understand and, more importantly, rewire. This is a solvable problem.
The writer Tim Urban has this brilliant way of illustrating what's going on in our heads. In a non-procrastinator's brain, you've got a rational decision maker at the wheel, making smart choices. But in our brain, there's a passenger, an instant gratification monkey who only cares about what's easy and fun, right now. And yeah, way too often, that monkey just grabs the wheel.
So here's our game plan for getting that monkey under control. First, we'll dive into what's actually happening in your brain. Then we'll uncover the real emotional reason we put things off. After that, we get super practical. We'll look at how to hack your motivation system. I'll give you a 3-step plan you can use today. And finally, we'll talk about a long-term mindset to beat procrastination for good.
All right, let's dive into Section 1, your brain on procrastination. Think of this as the neurological tug-of-war that starts this whole mess. So you've got this battle raging inside your head between two key systems. On one side, there's your super-evolved prefrontal cortex. That's the rational you that makes long-term plans. But on the other side, you've got the ancient primitive limbic system. That's the monkey, and all it cares about is what feels good right now. So whenever you find yourself scrolling through your phone instead of working, yeah, the monkey won that round.
And the key chemical, the fuel for this whole battle, is dopamine. Now, we all call it the pleasure molecule, but that's not quite right. As neuroscientist Andrew Huberman explains, it's really the molecule of motivation. It's not about the pleasure of getting the reward, it's the chemical that drives us to go pursue it in the first place.
And here's how that motivation actually works, which is kind of wild. It starts with a craving, right? That gives you a tiny little peak in dopamine. But then, almost immediately, your dopamine level drops below where you started. And it's that drop, that feeling of pain or lack, that actually creates the drive to go get the thing. So, in a weird way, motivation is mostly about trying to scratch an itch.
So let's jump to our next section and see how all this brain science leads to that feeling of procrastination. Because here's the secret. It's not really a productivity problem. It's an emotional one.
Mel Robbins just nails it with this quote: "Procrastination is a form of stress relief." Just let that sink in. When we put something off, it's not because we don't want to do the task. It's because the task triggers a negative feeling, stress, boredom, fear, whatever. And our brain's most basic instinct is to find immediate relief from that bad feeling. And this creates a classic, powerful habit loop. The trigger? Stress. The pattern? Avoid the stressful thing by doing something else, literally anything else. And the reward? A little hit of relief. Your brain learns that pattern so fast. Feeling bad? Do this other thing, feel better. The huge problem, of course, is that the relief is temporary, and the stress just comes roaring back, usually even stronger.
The author Stephen Pressfield actually gave this negative force a name. He calls it resistance, with a capital R. He describes it as this invisible, universal enemy that actively pushes back anytime we try to do something that really matters to us. And it's fueled by our deepest fears. Fear of failure, fear of what people will think, even fear of what happens if we succeed.
But here's the reframe that changes everything. You can use resistance as a tool. Think of it like a compass. That feeling of dread, that intense desire to run away, it's pointing you directly at the thing you need to do most. The more resistance you feel, the more you can be absolutely sure that this work is critical for you.
And this brings us right back to Tim Urban's idea of the dark playground. This is where the instant gratification monkey takes you when it grabs the wheel. It looks like you're having fun, right? You're watching videos, scrolling feeds, but you're not actually having fun because the air is just thick with guilt and anxiety and dread. It's leisure that feels terrible.
So, how do we get out of this awful playground? Well, that brings us to Section 3, hacking your brain's motivation system. This is all about learning to work with your brain's natural wiring instead of constantly trying to fight it. You know, we've all heard the same old advice. Just break it down into the smallest possible step. But as Dr. Alec Kanogia from Healthy Gamer GG points out, that often backfires. A much smarter, brain-based approach is to ask, what is the next best thing I can do? Find a meaningful step that you're actually capable of taking right now.
So why does that tiny step advice fail? Well, your brain is smart. It does a quick cost-benefit analysis. If you have to dig a 100-foot well, digging just 5 feet feels like a total waste of energy. It gets you nothing. The dopamine payoff for writing one sentence of my essay is basically zero, so your brain says, nope, not worth it, and the resistance can actually get stronger.
Now here's a really counterintuitive strategy from Andrew Huberman called the effort rebound. If you are totally stuck in a motivation hole, instead of doing something easy, do something harder, but make it safe and short, like a 30-second blast of cold water in the shower. That sharp, uncomfortable jolt can actually reset your dopamine system and help you rebound back to a baseline level of motivation much faster. It's weird, but it works.
And this is especially key for the ADHD brain, which handles dopamine a little differently. For many people with ADHD, motivation pretty much runs on 3 things: interest, urgency, or novelty. If a task has none of those, starting can feel physically impossible. So sometimes the hack is to turn a boring task into a game to make it novel, or to set a short, intense deadline to create urgency.
Okay, theory's great, but let's make this super practical. Section 4 is your 3-step action plan that you can use the second this is over, even if you have absolutely zero motivation.
The framework is dead simple. First, you have to physically interrupt that habit of avoiding. Second, you shrink the task down to something that feels totally non-threatening. And third, you actually start.
Step 1 is the 5-second rule from Mel Robbins. The instant you feel yourself hesitating, you have to interrupt that mental pattern. You just count backwards, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then you physically move. That countdown is like a starting pistol for your brain. It jolts you out of that primitive monkey brain and kicks your prefrontal cortex, the rational you, into gear.
All right, so you've counted down and you've moved. Step 2 is the 5-minute rule. You commit to working on that dreaded thing for just 5 minutes. That's it. Anyone can do anything for 5 minutes. And here's the key. The goal isn't to finish it. The goal is just to start. This lowers that barrier to entry so much that the monkey doesn't even have time to complain. And here's a fantastic little bonus tip. If you are just completely stuck in that mental tug of war, get up and walk through a doorway. Seriously, researchers call this the doorway effect. Physically crossing a threshold can trigger a little reset in your working memory, which can help break that loop of conflict and give you a fresh slate to use the 5-second rule.
Now, those rules are amazing for getting a specific task started. But to really win the war against procrastination, we need a bigger shift. And that brings us to our final section, becoming a professional.
Tim Urban points out that there are really 2 kinds of procrastination. The first kind has deadlines. You know this one. A panic monster eventually wakes up, scares the monkey away, and you get it done. It's stressful, but it works. But the second kind is way more dangerous. It has no deadlines. Things like starting a business, getting healthy, or fixing a relationship. The panic monster never shows up for those, and that is where procrastination can quietly ruin our lives and lead to huge, long-term regret.
So to fight that second silent killer, Steven Pressfield says you have to become a professional. Look at this chart. The amateur only works when they're inspired. The professional shows up every day, especially on the days they don't feel like it. This isn't about your job title, it's a deep shift in how you approach your most important work.
And here's maybe the most practical way to become a professional. Shift your goals. Stop focusing on outcomes you can't control, like get 1 million views. That just feeds the resistance. Instead, focus only on input goals you can control, like I will publish 2 videos a week, or I will write 500 words a day. This makes doing the work the actual reward.
And it is so important to remember that you are not alone in this. This is a universal human struggle. Like Tim Urban says, everyone is procrastinating on something important. We all have that big, scary, no-deadline thing hanging over our heads.
To really make this real, he suggests visualizing a life calendar. It's just a grid of boxes, and each box is 1 week of a 90-year life. And when you see it all laid out, you realize 2 things very quickly. 1, it's not that many boxes. And 2, a lot of them are already filled in. This isn't meant to be depressing. It's meant to create a healthy dose of urgency. These are the weeks you have left.
So we'll end with this question. Knowing what you now know about the monkey, about resistance and about the weeks you have left, what is that one important, no deadline thing that you are really procrastinating on?